10 years ago, Ethan stole everything: my inheritance, my future, my trust. Tonight, he stands in the spotlight, basking in applause as entrepreneur of the decade, convinced his kingdom is untouchable. But from the shadows of the auditorium, my finger hovers over send. One email, and the empire he built on my stolen life will crumble. He grins for the cameras. The same flawless smile he wore the day he betrayed me. Crystal trophy raised, he soaks in the cheers of people fooled by his lies. They see a legend, I see a fraud. 10 years of patience, 10 years of silence. Now, the truth is loaded and ready to detonate. Let's rewind. Before the betrayal, before the secrets, we were inseparable. Or so I believed. My older brother Ethan and I were two halves of the same whole. At least, that's what our mum used to say. He was the charismatic, ambitious leader. I was the quiet, steady anchor. He had the grand ideas. I was the one who figured out how to actually make them work. We grew up in a modest but comfortable home, our lives built around the family construction company our dad had started from scratch. It wasn't some global conglomerate, just a local business, but it was our legacy. Dad had built it with his own 2 hands. His integrity poured into every foundation he laid. He taught us the value of a firm handshake, an honest day's work, and the principle that your name was the most valuable thing you could ever own. Ethan always seemed to take those lessons to heart, at least on the surface. He was a star, effortlessly charming. He could talk his way into or out of anything. Teachers loved him, our friends looked up to him, and our parents saw in him the future of their life's work. I was never jealous, I was proud. He was my big brother, my protector, my partner. We spent our summers working for Dad Ethan, charming the clients while I pored over blueprints and budgets. The plan, the one we'd whispered about in our shared bedroom late at night, was that we would take over the business together. We would take our father's legacy and build it into something even bigger, side by side. Even then, I saw hints of his ruthlessness, small things that seemed insignificant at the time, a little white lie to a supplier to get a better price. Taking credit for an idea that wasn't solely his. When I'd question him, he'd just laugh, ruffle my hair, and call me naive. That's just how the world works, little brother. He'd say, you have to play the game. And I believed him because I wanted to. I saw it as ambition, not a flaw. I was the fool who mistook a lack of conscience for a winning attitude. Our parents saw it too, but they called it drive. They were so proud of their 2 sons. They worked their entire lives with one dream, handing the keys over to us so they could finally enjoy a quiet retirement. And they did. They drew up a simple, straightforward will. Everything: the business, the house, their life savings was to be split right down the middle. A perfect 50-50ths. It was a monument to their faith in us, in our bond. They trusted Ethan to lead, and they trusted me to keep him grounded. They never could have imagined one of us would light the match, leaving the other to burn in the ashes. The end of my old life came without any warning. It was a phone call. In the middle of the night, a police officer on the other end, his voice filled with that practiced, detached sympathy. There had been an accident. A drunk driver ran a red light. Our parents were gone, just like that. The world tilted off its axis, and everything I had ever known was swallowed by a black hole of grief. The silence in our family home was the loudest sound I had ever heard. In the suffocating fog of those first few weeks, Ethan took charge. It seemed natural. He was the older brother, the decisive one. I was shattered, barely able to function, and he seemed like a pillar of strength. He handled the funeral. He spoke to the lawyers. He dealt with the endless river of paperwork. I was grateful. I leaned on him completely. I trusted him with my life, because at that point, he was all I had left. About a month after the funeral, he sat me down at the dining room table. Our father's empty chair was a constant, aching presence beside us. He spread a mountain of documents across the table. "This is it," he said, his voice grave. "All the estate stuff. It's a nightmare, but we have to get through it." He pointed to various signature lines, explaining them away with a wave of his hand. "This just transfers Dad's shares into our names. This one settles the taxes. This is just standard procedure to consolidate everything so we can manage it. We need to be efficient now." I looked at the dense pages of legal jargon, and my eyes just glazed over. My mind was still at the cemetery. I couldn't focus, I couldn't think. All I felt was the crushing weight of loss. He slid a pen into my hand. "It's okay," he said softly, putting a hand on my shoulder. "I've had the lawyer look over everything. It's all in order. We just need to sign, and we can start to move on, together." Together, that one word was all I needed. I picked up the pen and signed where he pointed. I signed page after page, my signature a sloppy testament to my grief and my blind, stupid trust. I signed my entire life away without even knowing it. Other shoe dropped 3 weeks later in the form of a registered letter, an eviction notice. I was being ordered to vacate my own home. I stared at it, thinking it had to be a mistake, some cruel administrative error. I called Ethan, my hands shaking, no answer. I drove to the office hour company, but the receptionist told me he was in a meeting. Finally, I got his new address from an old family friend. It was a sleek, modern penthouse apartment downtown, the kind of place we used to joke about owning. When he opened the door, he wasn't the grieving brother I'd been leaning on. He was cold, distant, a stranger wearing my brother's face. "What's going on, Ethan?" I asked, holding up the eviction notice. "Why is this happening?" He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He just sighed, this annoyed, inconvenienced sound. "It's done, Alex," he said. "The company needed to liquidate non-essential assets. The house was one of them." "Our company? What are you talking about? And what about my money? The savings?" "I went to the bank, Ethan. It's all gone." That's when he delivered the final, killing blow. He almost smiled. "You should have read the fine print, little brother. Those documents weren't for consolidating assets, they were a legal transfer. You signed over your half of the business. You signed over your claim to the house, the savings, all of it." To me, the world went silent. I couldn't breathe. Just stared at him, trying to reconcile the man in front of me with the brother I had loved. "Why?" I whispered. It was the only word I could get out. "Because I have a vision for this company, and you would have held me back," he said, his voice completely empty of emotion. "You're not a businessman, Alex. You're sentimental. I did what was necessary to protect the future of the company. Our parents' legacy." He had the audacity to use their memory against me. "Consider it a life lesson," he said, turning away. "Never sign something you haven't read." His lawyer, a man in a crisp suit I hadn't even noticed, stepped forward and calmly escorted me out. I was left standing in the hallway of that sterile building with nothing but the clothes on my back and maybe $200 in my pocket. He had taken everything, and he had done it with a pen, a lie, and my own broken heart. The first year was a blur of pure survival. I wasn't Alex, the owner of a promising business, anymore. I was a nobody. I was homeless. My world shrank to the size of a backpack. I slept on friends' couches until my presence became a burden, until I couldn't stand the pity in their eyes anymore. Pity felt like another kind of defeat. So I left, moving from one dingy motel to another, paying week by week with cash I earned from washing dishes, stocking shelves, and cleaning offices after dark. The shame was a physical weight. Every day was a battle against despair. But the rage was a fire that kept me warm. It was the only thing I had left. I'd see Ethan's face smiling from the local business journal at a newsstand. He'd rebranded the company Synergy Corp, or some other soulless buzzword. The articles praised his bold vision and maverick strategies. They called him a rising star. My rising star, built on my inheritance and my trust. That the turning point came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in a public library, my sanctuary, using the free internet to stay warm. Out of morbid curiosity, I typed Ethan's name into the search bar. A new article had just been published. It was a glowing profile on his latest deal, a massive land development that would make him one of the most powerful men in the city. He'd bought a huge tract of previously protected land to build luxury homes. The article quoted him talking about ethical growth and community building. Reading his hypocritical words, something inside me snapped. The despair finally burned away, leaving something cold, hard, and clear. Revenge wasn't enough. Revenge was messy. I wanted something colder, more calculated. I wouldn't just take what he had. I would wait. I would let him build his empire as high as it could go. I'd let him get so comfortable that he'd forget even existed. And then, when he was at the very top, I would personally kick the foundations out from under him. He taught me to read the fine print. In that dusty library, I decided I would become an expert in it. I would become his ruin. My new life began that day. I moved to a different city where no one knew my name. I became a ghost. I deleted my social media. I cut all ties. I enrolled in a community college, taking night classes in paralegal studies, then accounting and forensics. I was a model student, driven by a singular, burning purpose. Every concept I learned at corporate law, financial tracing, auditing was another weapon in my arsenal. I lived a life of extreme frugality. A tiny basement apartment, cheap food, second-hand clothes. Every spare dollar and every waking hour went into my education and my plan. After 4 years, I had my certifications. I got a low-level job at a mid-sized auditing firm. I was invisible, just another quiet guy in a cubicle. But I was good. More than good. I was meticulous. My bosses praised my ability to spot inconsistencies everyone else missed. I wasn't doing it for them. I was practicing. I was honing my skills on other people's balance sheets, preparing for my one true target. All the while I watched Ethan. From a distance, I became the most dedicated biographer he never knew he had. I set up news alerts for his name. I read about his expansion, his acquisitions, his charity galas. I saw pictures of his new life. The beautiful wife. 2 perfect kids. The sprawling mansion. He was a pillar of the community, spouting nonsense about integrity. And every article, every photo, was just more fuel for the fire. For years, I searched for a vulnerability. It had to be there. Men like Ethan always get sloppy. His theft from me was a private matter. My word against his. I needed something undeniable, something criminal. I found it in the details of that first big land deal. It was the cornerstone of his empire. It had given him the capital and reputation to skyrocket. I decided to dig into it, using every skill I had so painstakingly acquired. It took 2 more years of digging in my spare time, and then I found it. The key. The land he'd bought was designated as protected wetlands. Developing it should have been impossible without a favorable environmental impact report. The official report on public record stated the development would have minimal effect. It was signed by a small, independent consulting firm and a mid-level official at the city planning department. Something about the consulting firm's name felt off. I dug deeper. The firm had been created just 2 months before the report was issued, and it was dissolved 6 months after. It was a shell company. Using my knowledge of corporate registries, I found the digital breadcrumbs. They led from that shell company not to some scientist, but to a holding company owned by Ethan. He hadn't just hired someone to write a favorable report. He had created a fake company to write it himself and submitted it as an impartial assessment. It was breathtakingly bold. But I needed the final piece. I tracked the city official who signed off on it. The man had retired a year after the deal, moving into a lavish home far beyond his means. After another year of patient digging, I found it. A wire transfer. A single, large payment from an offshore account traceable back to one of Ethan's other shell corporations into the official's wife's bank account. 1 week after the development was approved. It was the bribe, the smoking gun. I had everything. The fraudulent report, proof Ethan created the fake firm, the bank records of the bribe. I was holding a perfectly packaged case file. My decade of silence was over. I just needed the right moment. And when I saw the announcement that my brother was set to receive the Entrepreneur of the Decade award, I knew the day had finally come. The ballroom was obscene. Chandeliers dripped crystals, casting a golden glow on the city's elite. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and self-congratulation. It was a cathedral built to worship money, and tonight, my brother was their god. I'd rented a tuxedo that felt like a costume. I was just another face in the crowd at a table in the back, nursing a glass of water. From here, I could see the main stage and the giant screens flashing professional portraits of Ethan looking confident, magnanimous every inch, the man of the decade. A parade of speakers sang his praises. They talked about his unwavering integrity, his commitment to the community, his genius. With every lie, the cold knot in my stomach tightened. I watched Ethan at the head table, soaking it all in, a humble king accepting the adoration of his court. His wife gazed at him with pure adoration. His 2 children looked up at their father like he was a superhero, all of them living inside his beautiful lie. Finally, the moment came. The presenter announced his name, and the room erupted in a standing ovation. Ethan rose, kissed his wife, and strode to the stage. He started his speech with practiced humility. Then, he looked toward his family, his voice thick with emotion. But most of all, he said, "I have to thank my late parents. They taught me the value of hard work and dreaming big. I hope, wherever they are, that I've made them proud." That was it. That was my cue. As he desecrated their memory, I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen, my heart hammering not with fear, but with a decade's worth of righteous fury. The email was already drafted. The subject line, irrefutable evidence of fraud, the foundation of Ethan's empire. The recipient list was a work of art. Every member of his board, his largest investors, the state attorney general's office, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the lead investigative reporters for every major news outlet in the region. Attached was the entire story, a neat digital package of his downfall. Ethan held his award high. Thank you, he beamed, as the room exploded in another round of applause. In the back of the room, under the cover of the noise, I pressed send. For a second, nothing. The applause continued. Then, a single phone lit up at a nearby table, then another. Like a silent virus, blue light cascaded across the room. A board member in the front row frowned at his screen. I watched his face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and then a flash of pure fury. He shoved the phone in front of the man next to him. Their smiles vanished. The applause started to falter. A low murmur rippled through the room, a wave of whispers that grew into a confused, anxious buzz. On stage, Ethan's triumphant smile began to waver. He looked out, trying to understand the sudden shift. He saw the faces of his most powerful allies turned not to him, but down to their phones. He saw his wife's face, her adoring smile frozen. As another woman leaned over and showed her the screen, a reporter shot up from his seat and practically ran from the ballroom, yelling into his phone. The dam broke. I didn't need to see any more. I stood up and watched my brother for one last moment. He was alone on that stage, the spotlight still on him, the heavy award in his hand, looking utterly lost. I saw the first flicker of dawning terror as he started to understand that his world was ending, right here, in his moment of ultimate triumph. I didn't say a word. I just turned my back on the beautiful chaos I had created and walked out. The fallout wasn't just a story, it was an inferno. By the next morning, Ethan's name was everywhere. The new headlines were brutal. Entrepreneur of the decade exposed as a fraud. Synergy Corp built on corruption. Criminal investigation launched. My email had left no room for spin. The evidence was too damning. His company's valuation became worthless overnight. Investors, furious, initiated lawsuits. The entire board of directors resigned, publicly denouncing him. His life was dismantled with surgical efficiency. The Attorney General's office froze. All his assets. His wife filed for divorce within the week, fighting for sole custody. His powerful friends, the ones who had toasted his success, now treated him like a leper. I watched it all unfold from the quiet of my small apartment, a spectator to the demolition I had engineered. But a month later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered and said nothing. There was a moment of silence, then a ragged breath. Alex, it was Ethan. His voice was a broken, desperate rasp. Alex, you have to help me. I know you did this. You have to stop it. They're going to take everything. I'll give you whatever you want. I'll give you half of what's left. Please. He started to sob, a pathetic, heaving sound. He begged, he reasoned, he threatened. I just listened. I let him pour out all his fear and self-pity. When he finally ran out of words, his sobbing tapering off into exhausted silence, I didn't say anything. I just pressed the end call button. It was the first time we had spoken in 10 years. It would be the last. They arrested him 2 weeks later. The pictures showed him being led from his mansion in handcuffs, his face pale and drawn. He wasn't the entrepreneur of the decade anymore. He was just another man on the evening news. He eventually took a plea deal, admitting to fraud and conspiracy. Never got the inheritance back. I never even tried. That money was tainted. My revenge wasn't about getting rich. It was about justice. It was about taking the life lesson he'd so cruelly given me and turning it back on him. People might ask if it was worth it. Was it worth dedicating 10 years of my life to destroying my own brother? I've thought about that a lot, and I've realized it wasn't really about him. It was about me. It was about refusing to be a victim. It was about taking back control of my own story. For a decade, I lived in the shadow of his betrayal. But now, that shadow is gone. I have a quiet life, a respectable career I built myself, and a sense of peace that no amount of stolen money could ever buy. I am not the man he tried to make me. I am the man I became in spite of him. And for the first time in a very long time, I'm finally free. My story is over, but I know there are so many more out there. If you want to hear more stories like this one, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. I'm curious too. Hear what you think. What would you have done in my shoes? Was it justified? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for listening.